Last summer, my friend Siobhan, she gave me a gift. It was a little book called Perthshire in History and Legend, written by a man called Archie McKerracher. And it's my favourite type of history book, actually. It's a bit like a treasure map. At the weekend, put that little book in your pocket and put your wellies on and go out and hunt some great stories. But my friend Siobhan, being a very positive person, she feels very connected to the ebb and flow of different energies that surround us. Well, buried in that little book, right in the middle, there's a story that I think she is going to love. It's a story about a man called Robert Kirk, who was born very near where I am sitting right now. And he died perhaps on this very spot, apparently. There is a gravestone down in the local churchyard not far from here with his name on it. But it's kind of well known that the coffin under the ground is full of stones. Because although Robert was born in 1644, he might not actually yet be dead. I'm near the little village of Aberfoyle, where in 1644 Robert Kirk was born. He was the seventh son of the local minister, the Reverend James Kirk. And Robert grew up to be a thoughtful, a generous, very studious and tolerant young man. And he got an education. He went to Dundee High School and then on to Edinburgh University, where he got a Master of the Arts degree at just 17 years old. This, as you can imagine, impressed a few folk. Despite his father being very poor, he was a very educated young man. The presbytery of Dunblane were so impressed that they decided to pay for his continuing education. And he went on then to study theology at St Andrews University. He became a Doctor of Divinity at the blossoming age of 20. He is now the Reverend Robert Kirk, and his first ever post is at the lovely little parish church in Balkidder. In 1664, Robert came here to Balkidder parish, and according to the few accounts that exist at the time, he simply rolled his sleeves up and got stuck into the job for the next 21 years. I mean, he was a dedicated, hard-working, thorough, yet compassionate man with a truly soft centre.
At the age of 41, he left this lovely glen and settled in to a new job. He was going back to Aberfoyle and into the very house within which he was born.
came here, Aberfoyle, Kirkton Church to be precise, where he was the minister here. It's now in ruins. There's a couple of interesting objects still here. For instance, you can just about make out these large iron coffins. They're mort safes. They would lie on top of a freshly planted grave. It's to prevent folk from stealing the bodies and selling them on for medical research, which is kind of strange because there are no medical research facilities anywhere near here. Why did they feel the need to protect the bodies? Who was stealing them? What were they doing with the bodies? Anyway, back to Robert. It was after Robert arrived here that things, well, they started to get a bit weird. Robert would head out in the middle of the night with his night clothes on. He would wander up the wee path and head up to that hill right there. He would go onto the hill, he would lie down, he would press his ear to the ground and he would listen. He says he was chatting to the Shiva, which means the good or the peaceful people, which to you and I are the fairies. Say to me, let me unfold you. Here I am, here I am, waiting to hold you. Oh yes, we have fairies here in Scotland. But they would hate you to call them, don't use the word fairy for goodness sake. They are the she. That's S-I-T-H, she. Wherever you find a place name with a she sound in it, you're in fairyland. Like Glen She or Schiehallion, of course. Let's get back to Robert. You know, he would spend whole nights out here. Sometimes his wife would have to come looking for him, such was her worry. Then one day in 1690, Robert wrote a short manuscript called The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns and Fairies. And he described in a fantastic detail the folk that he had been with on the hill. You know, it was over 100 years before it was published. I got myself a wee copy. The year was 1690. When the Catholic King James VII and II, he had ran away to France, being replaced, of course, by his Protestant daughter Mary and her ultra-Protestant husband William of Orange. You know, Presbyterian and Episcopalian practices were riding high in Scotland. Witches were being strangled and burned. But here we have a deeply religious man who wrote a manuscript about strange otherworldly beings that don't actually have a religion of their own, and they would use their magical qualities to navigate their own existence. You know, he even describes himself as having second sight. He should have been burned at the stake for this, but somehow the lovely man got away with it. I have no idea how he managed that. I've come into my shed, as you can see, nice warm shed, because I've made some notes from the manuscript that Robert had written. Now it's raining on and off, so you might hear that now and again on the roof of the shed. Please forgive me for the weather in this country. But we'll get cracking. I've got my wee laptop right here, and I'll try and read you some of these fantastic wee notes here. The she are said to be of a middle nature betwixt man and angel, of intelligent fluidous spirits and light changeable bodies, like in the astral plane, somewhat of the nature of condensed cloud and best seen in twilight, These bodies be so pliable through the subtlety of the spirits that agitate them, that they can make them appear or disappear at pleasure. Let me see, let's scroll down. How about this one? The double man, or the shadow you, that can only be seen by men of second sight. Or, you know, not many women get the second sight, apparently, according to Robert. Or, to be more accurate, according to men. Now, this co-walker, or reflex man, can be seen just before or sometimes just after the original has been in the house. And sometimes just before or just after the original meets their death. Now there's another one, and apparently this one has been substantiated by many a mother of the day. The she would steal a new mother from her bed and take her into fairyland to nurse their own fairy children. In the new mother's old bed, the she will have placed a flesh and bones mirror version of that mother, but something will not be right. The fairy inhabiting this mirror version will not have the nature of the new mother and may begin devouring the very fleshy part of the vessel that it inhabits, and eventually leaving the mirror mother vessel once she has withered away and dying as though naturally caused, which was very common in that day. Now, to prevent this, the Highland folk would place a piece of iron in the bed of the new mothers because the she hate iron. Now, I've tried to figure this out. I tried to figure out Kirk's words. Now, I'm quite often wrong about things, which is okay. Every single student of anything historical should readily prepare themselves to be corrected from time to time. Now, sometimes you just get duff information to start with, and other times, and this is the more honourable of times, is when new information or evidence or archaeology comes to light, and you have to change your view to reflect these new things. Where was I? Yes. To prevent new mothers being replaced by dying changelings, then the new mothers must sleep with iron in their bed, because the she know that iron has the ability to both scald you at a freezing temperature and at red hot temperatures, and they believe that their hell exists somewhere between these two places. Now, the changeling knows that its torment had either started in that place or is about to start from that place. Where there is iron, the fairies fear to tread. On the evening of the 14th of May in 1692, the Reverend Robert Kirk took a little walk up the little path up here onto the Doon Hill. He lay down, as was his thing, and the Reverend Kirk, he died. His body was taken to the wee church and his funeral was organised. But before his body could be popped down into the ground, his body mysteriously disappeared. It was believed that he had been taken by the fairies. So the villagers just filled his coffin full of stones and they had the funeral anyway. A
few days later, Robert showed up, looking very much alive. He spoke to his cousin, pleading with him to convey a message to Graham of Duchney, a local laird. The message was clear. Robert had been taken into fairyland and is under their spell. He will reappear at the baptism just after the birth of his child, and as soon as the laird sees him, he must throw an iron rod over his head. Only this can free him from the fairy spell. The laird never believed Robert's cousin, but just in case, when the baptism finally arrived, the laird had an iron rod in his pocket.
It was a very busy house, and near the end of the ceremony, a very much solid and alive Robert Kirk showed up in the doorway, witnessed by everybody that was there. The laird was so stunned, he forgot to throw the rod, and Robert was glaring at him as he quietly slipped out of a different door than the one he came in. And Robert was never seen again. There are all kinds of stories of folk disappearing and reappearing around sites like these. We are, of course, on a ley line. These are lines of electromagnetic fields which wrap around the earth following ancient fault lines. They're detectable using modern equipment, and we're not really sure how folk of the past managed to find these places, but they did. And not only that, they knew that strange things could happen in places like this. Now, it is said that when you are taken by the Sidhe, that time will pass very differently for you. Well, it will go very normally for us out here in the physical world, but very slowly for you trapped inside fairyland. What might seem one evening for you could be 50 years for us. Now, I heard the phrase, "He's away with the fairies," many times when I was growing up, meaning that I'm in a wee world of my own. Now, this is just a phrase which has been passed down through the generations, but it came from a time where fairyland was a place to fear. I like to think that Robert is still around. Maybe he was watching me as I was doing my filming on the wee Doon Hill. He's trapped there, of course, you know, and he can never be heard, he can never be seen. You know, there are far too many unexplained phenomenon that are associated with ley lines. So I think I'm going to be contented in myself to wish him well. And if ever he is able to break free from the fairy spell that he's under and he just shows up one day, I hope he's well received, because he's a man of not only good character, but quite possibly he'll be carrying with him one of the best stories that can ever be told. There are, of course, loads more details to this story. Like, what do the Sidhe look like? What do they wear? What kind of powers do they have? And what do they want with Robert anyway? Really? All these things will have to wait for another day. But in the meantime, I'll leave you with this sad but ultimately beautiful part of the story. Robert was married before to a lassie called Isabel Campbell. Madly in love, apparently. But unfortunately, after just a few years, Isabel died on Christmas Day of 1680. Robert would have been heartbroken with this. He buried her here in the old churchyard at Balkidder Parish, now in ruins, as you can see behind me. The new one very much still working right up there. He had her buried right here. He insisted on writing the epitaph himself, but not only that, he insisted on actually carving the sad words onto the gravestone himself. It took me a little bit to find her. She's right down here. Now the weather has eroded the carving. These heartbroken words that Robert scratched on here, you can no longer read them, unfortunately. So, do you know, it means that these words that Robert wrote for Isabel, they shall always only remain between Robert and Isabel. And you know what?